This ship is empty. No oil, no cargo, no visible threat. And yet, the United States is chasing it across the Atlantic. Russia is escorting it with naval vessels, and somewhere beneath the surface, a submarine is watching. This is not a movie scene. It is happening right now in international waters. The tanker is accused of violating US sanctions tied to Iran and Venezuela. Washington wants to board it. Moscow wants to protect it. And suddenly, the ocean once neutral is no longer neutral at all. This is not about oil. It is about power, about who gets to decide which rules matter and where those rules stop. If you want to understand how economic sanctions quietly evolve into military confrontation, stay with me. Because this moment is not an exception. It is a preview. To understand why, we need to unpack what this ship really represents and why both sides refuse to blink. When we look at this situation closely, the facts seem simple. One oil tanker, one set of sanctions, one attempted boarding. But geopolitics is never about the surface facts. It is about what those facts trigger. The United States argues that this vessel is part of a sanctioned network moving Iranian and Venezuelan oil. Its focus is not the ship's name, or its flag, or even its current cargo. It is the ship's identity, its history, ownership, and sanctions record. From Washington's perspective, enforcement must follow the vessel wherever it goes. Russia sees the same ship very differently. It sees a Russian-flagged vessel sailing in international waters, and under international maritime law, that status matters. A boarding attempt is not routine enforcement. It is a challenge to sovereignty. So this is the real issue. Not whether the tanker is empty, but whether economic rules can be imposed by force far from home and under the shadow of military power. To understand how we reached this point, we need to look backward at how sanctions slowly moved from paper to practice. To understand this moment, we have to go back before this ship, before this escort, before this pursuit. For decades, sanctions were designed as distant tools, financial restrictions, trade barriers, legal pressure applied quietly through banks and paperwork. But over time, sanctions expanded. They moved from boardrooms to ports, from spreadsheets to sea lanes. Venezuela is central to this shift. As its oil exports came under heavy US sanctions, enforcement became physical. Tankers were tracked, routes were monitored, boardings became thinkable. And then came Iran, another sanctioned oil producer, another network of ships, shell companies, and reflagging tactics. What emerged was a shadow system, often called the Dark Fleet, designed to move oil while staying just ahead of enforcement. This tanker fits that pattern. A history of sanctioned cargo, a sudden name change, a last-minute switch of flags. These are not random decisions. They are defensive moves inside a long-running economic war. But here's the turning point. When enforcement leaves ports and enters international waters, it changes character. It stops being administrative, it becomes strategic. And once strategy enters the picture, confrontation is no longer accidental. That brings us to the first real flashpoint in this story, when tracking turned into pursuit. The first flashpoint did not begin with missiles or warnings. It began with a maneuver. Last month, US Coast Guard forces moved to board this tanker in the Caribbean. They had a warrant. They believed the ship was heading toward Venezuela. From Washington's perspective, this was routine enforcement. But before boarding could happen, the ship did something dramatic. It changed course abruptly, decisively. Instead of heading south, it turned north toward Europe. Almost at the same time, US military aircraft began appearing over the Atlantic. Refueling tankers, reconnaissance planes, special operations assets. Tracking became pressure. Pressure became a signal. And then came the response that changed everything. Russia did not issue threats. It sent ships, naval vessels, and According to US officials, a submarine, this was the moment the crisis crossed a line. A sanctions case became a military standoff, not declared, not dramatic, but unmistakable. If you're trying to understand how modern conflicts escalate without a single shot being fired, pay attention here. This is how it starts now. Because beneath this encounter lies a deeper system one most people never see. What looks like a confrontation at sea is, in reality, a clash of systems. The United States is not chasing a ship. It is enforcing a database. Modern sanctions do not depend on flags or paint. They follow numbers, IMO registrations, ownership chains, historical behavior embedded in global tracking systems. From Washington's perspective, this tanker never truly changed. A new name does not erase an old record. A new flag does not cancel a sanctions history. Enforcement follows identity, not appearance. Russia understands this logic and exploits its limits. By reflagging the vessel, Moscow changes the legal terrain. A ship under the Russian flag is no longer stateless. Under international maritime law, that matters. This is the hidden mechanism at work. Sanctions rely on compliance, but compliance relies on shared agreement. When that agreement breaks down, enforcement must choose escalate or retreat. By escorting the tanker, Russia is testing that choice. Not with words, but with presence. Not to protect oil, but to challenge who controls the rules. And once rules are challenged at sea, they are challenged everywhere. That tension sets the stage for the second, more dangerous surge in this crisis, one that pushes beyond legality into raw power. The second surge in this crisis is quieter but far more dangerous. No shots are fired, no warnings are broadcast. And yet, the skies fill with aircraft. US refueling tankers circle the North Atlantic. Reconnaissance plane trace invisible lines over cold water. Helicopters move into position. Every signal says the same thing: readiness. At the same time, the tanker keeps moving. Escorted, protected, deliberately visible. This is escalation without announcement. A contest of proximity and patience. Each side is testing how close it can get without forcing the other to act. American officials say they would prefer to seize the ship, not sink it. That sentence alone tells you how narrow the margin has become. Seizure requires boarding. Boarding requires authority. And authority here is disputed. Russia responds with a familiar phrase: concern. But concern is not the message. The message is steel in the water. This is no longer about one vessel. It is about whether military presence can override legal ambiguity, about whether deterrence works without declarations. And in moments like this, history shows us one thing clearly: miscalculation is never loud until it is. What happens next does not begin in Washington or Moscow. It begins with you, because when sanctions harden into confrontation, the costs do not stay abstract. They travel, they ripple, and they land in ordinary lives. When oil routes become unstable, prices respond long before diplomats do. Fuel gets more expensive, transportation costs rise, food prices follow. You may never hear the name of this tanker again, but you will feel its effects quietly, persistently. At the pump, on your bills, in the background anxiety of an uncertain global economy. This is the uncomfortable truth of modern power politics. Great powers play chess. Citizens pay the entry fee. And there is something else. When enforcement turns militarized, predictability disappears. Markets fear uncertainty more than bad news. Families do too. If you are wondering why the world feels more fragile, why every crisis seems closer than the last, this is part of the answer. The systems meant to stabilize global order are becoming instruments of pressure. If this analysis helps you see the bigger picture, pause for a moment, share it, because understanding is no longer a luxury, it is a form of protection. And as these pressures spread outward, their impact does not stop at borders. It reshapes alliances, trade routes, and the balance of power itself.